Good morning, and thank you for attending today. This is a discussion of two of the hottest topics in tech, AI and cyber. And with me, I have two real experts and leaders to talk about this. Sitting across from me are Harold Rivas, CISO for Trellix. He leads Trellix's global security and compliance initiatives. He brings more than 2 decades experience with cybersecurity. A lot of it in the financial community I saw in reading your bio. So I think that's really helpful, including Santander and Fujitsu, so not all American. He also led global cybersecurity programs at Citigroup. With him is Grant Schneider, an old friend. Grant is Senior Director of Cybersecurity Services at Venables. Thanks for inviting me to your party out in San Francisco.
Always.
Good food. Prior to that, he was the first Federal Chief Information Security Officer at the White House and served on the National Security Council as a Senior Director for Cybersecurity Policy. Grant's bio is actually quite long, so I'll skip it. Your bio is long too, but trust me, these are real experts. So we're going to turn to the discussion of what I think is a really interesting intersection for policy, a real interesting intersection for AI, which of course is inescapable now, and cybersecurity, which is beneath it all in some ways. So let me start by asking Harold, do you want to make some opening remarks? Do you want to set the scene for us?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And thank you for the collaboration with CSIS on this joint research. We find this to be one of the defining moments for cybersecurity as a career track for CISOs everywhere. The topic of GenAI and the potential impact of GenAI on the future of this role is really affecting many of us in considering what we might be doing in the next couple of years. Something that will have a disproportionate impact relative to what we've seen in this industry. We're expecting an acceleration of capabilities from threat actors, as well as hopefully a increased capability for defenders everywhere. So this is going to be one of our largest areas of focus for Trellix. It's an area of research that we think is going to be absolutely critical. So I want to thank you again for the opportunity.
Great. Grant, you get to talk to a lot of companies, usually in unhappy circumstances. What are they telling you about this?
Yeah, I think it's been interesting. You know, if we look at the arc of cybersecurity over the last 25 or more years, from kind of information assurance to what is now cybersecurity, it's evolved. It's had some acceleration points, and certainly, as we become more dependent on technology, it's become more impactful. Cyber incidents have become far more impactful. I think while artificial intelligence or machine learning has been around and companies have been embedding those types of capabilities in their products for years, really it's the last 12 to 18 months that it's come to the public forefront. And so I think the speed with which we're seeing the AI disruption to technology and cybersecurity is something new. And I think people are as we saw in the study you guys did, grasping with what does that mean today? What is it going to mean for us internally for our services? And what's it going to mean with our customer interactions? So I think there's more unknowns than knowns at this point.
Let's start with a 50,000-foot question. We are a think tank after all. How has AI changed the cybersecurity environment? You were talking a little about this, but what changes do you see coming down the pike in the next few years as a result of the adoption of this new technology?
So I'm seeing it right now in kind of 2 ways. I think there's the technology impacts that it's having, and Harold talked a little bit about both from the adversary perspective. It's a great set of capabilities for them that are cheap and easy to use, and that they can leverage to exploit vulnerabilities in our systems. I think from a defensive standpoint, we're still coming to grips with what it's going to mean. Unfortunately, in my opinion, the defense is always a little slower than the offense when it comes to technology implementation. I think the other thing I'm seeing a lot from a policy standpoint is just a bit of a chasing the kid's soccer ball that is now AI, and for quite a while has been cybersecurity. And I think there's some what does this mean for cyber? What does this mean for our focus on cyber? Are we just looking at it through a different lens going forward?
I agree. I think threat actors, there's this concept in software development organizations of a 10x developer. a developer who has tremendous capabilities relative to a peer. I think that GenAI is really introducing this idea of maybe a 10x offensive capability, right? So a threat actor who has armed themselves with a large language model that knows everything about your organization, every position, every individual, and when they're orchestrating an attack against an organization, has a 10x capability relative to perhaps another threat actor. And I think that'll become the norm. It's a scary proposition that they are leveraging these capabilities. We certainly are seeing some indicators of that.
What would you say those indicators are? I mean, because you're actually doing this, so what are the indicators you see?
Yeah, so I believe that the speed and sophistication and their ability to navigate an organization and understand the interplays and understand how to craft something that may represent or seem legitimately coming from an internal resource by understanding either their public profile and consuming some of those details, or understanding the nature of a business process in intimate detail. We're seeing some of that either manifest as a business email compromise type of attacks and a variety of other vectors. So those are just accelerations of existing capabilities, and I think this concept of just getting faster, while potentially unlocking some novel new techniques and attacks, I think those are some of the big things that are confronting the industry.
Does this change which sectors are most at risk? I mean, I'll know about healthcare, but are there others? And let's talk about healthcare, but what are the sectors, has the risk profile for sectors changed because of AI? And if so, which are the ones at the top of the list?
I don't have any data to suggest that like more people or different sectors are being targeted or at risk. I think that, to Harold's point, the ability for what was maybe a low-level adversary to now be that 10x adversary and to do it quickly and cheaply means that I think more individual organizations and likely more sectors are at a greater risk because the speed and the ability to scale that the adversaries have has significantly increased and increased without them having to make large investments.
Yeah. And I find that these organizations, these individuals, they're finding any method, whatever technique, they can get some leverage on an organization. So if they find some technique to overcome, let's say, an industrial control system, then they'll put that to practice. What I think ultimately the biggest challenge we are confronted with is not so much the industries, but how quickly those industries and those leaders can evolve their thinking about what's going on in the threat landscape affecting their organization. I find in conversations with CISOs worldwide that oftentimes those CISOs might be 10 years in advance of what their leadership understands to be the nature of the issues confronting their industry. So in many ways, they're serving as educator and trying to help the organization understand current threats, far less future threats.
That's really interesting because it suggests there's more stress on the CISO than in the past. And one of the things, this report is built on a survey, and one of the things that we wrestled with how to include, right, is that CISOs are feeling really stressed. And a lot of it has to do with AI, but what are you seeing for that? It's not, CSIS does usually not write about stress, so at least not that kind of stress.
Well, if I may, I think that it's a situation, we talk about this extensively at Trellix. We look at and try to understand the nature of the challenges that CISOs are confronting so that we can better address their issues. And one of the biggest challenges we face is that the role of the CISO can be redefined over a 24-hour period. Right, a completely new threat actor can emerge, a completely new novel technique can emerge for your industry that can change fundamentally your posture, your investments, your strategy, everything that you set out to do over the course of, let's say, a 24-month period. So those things are creating stressors. Now we've added, that was true before GenAI, now we've added a massive accelerator, something that's giving this disproportionate capability to the attacker that allows them to innovate very rapidly, to try new techniques. Ultimately, we're in a game where we lose if they score one time. That's a very challenging proposition for CISOs everywhere. So when they're looking at the nature of the threats, they're evaluating. I think we're somewhere in the high 90%, according to the survey, in terms of CISOs that are reconsidering their future based on GenAI.
I was just going to say that we weren't quite sure how to fit that in, but the more than 90% were reconsidering the job of CISO, and that's a big change from surveys we've done in the past.
Absolutely.
So presumably, correlation isn't causality, et cetera, but AI is in the picture and you've got this higher rate. What are you seeing, Grant?
I think for, if you're a CISO in an organization, you have a plan. I think in most organizations, the CISO is probably aware of the vast majority of the vulnerabilities and the risks in their environment. And, traditionally you would come up with your project plan and you would go seek funding from leadership and the board and kind of work off those vulnerabilities, and you would prioritize them based on, likelihood of being exploited and impact if they are exploited. And I think, and you could understand that some things are going to be very hard for an adversary to exploit, so you're going to put them lower on the list, and maybe you won't worry about them as much. I think the AI brings the adversaries an ability to find all of the vulnerabilities really, really quickly. And so now if I'm a CISO, I'm really stressed over my 12, 18-month project plan to work off these 20 items or whatever it is, because I know any one of them could bite me at any moment. Whereas maybe a couple years ago, I felt like the odds of someone finding that really unique vulnerability and being able to exploit it were pretty low. Now we know there's a lot of tools, and again, the scale impact is significant. And we were talking earlier about what sectors are at risk. I think anyone that has vulnerabilities that they haven't gotten to, the more of them that you have, the more risk you're going to be facing, and at a higher level than you were before.
Let me ask this, it's a little off topic, but do each of you use some sort of GPT? I was going to ask you what your favorite model was, but we don't need to plug for companies, so
Yeah.
Do you use it?
I do.
I use it.
I do a little, not a ton.
Really?
I use it a little bit though, and I think there's, and everyone is, right? I mean, I think
Sure.
and even if you don't know if you're using it, you probably are in some way,
Oh,
shape,
yeah.
or form.
That doesn't
right?
count.
Yeah. I'm using multiple.
Really?
So very actively involved in using them, exploring them. We're leveraging them within the organization, within the portfolio of our products, but also as an individual, as a CISO, and I highly recommend CISOs everywhere really leverage this as a capability. It's going to accelerate your ability to consume vast amounts of information. I am already and still independently consuming a lot of information, but this is helping to summarize and get me up to speed quickly.
Yeah, I'm not even sure if I can keep up with all the AI products that are being introduced. So it's a really, so the other
Every
thing,
product's now an AI product, Jim.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
again off topic, but if we had just named it Advanced Software Tools, which is what it really is,
Yeah.
people would not be fretting about Arnold Schwarzenegger in Terminator. But getting back on topic a little bit, one of the things that surprised me in the survey was that CISOs, one, their stress levels, and so many of them were thinking, the questions were clustered around, I'm thinking of changing jobs, changing career fields. The other part that surprised me was there was a desire or a demand for regulation, for AI regulation, and people thought that would be helpful. So what kind of regulation do you agree, and what kind of regulation do you think would be helpful?
Yeah, I'd like to take this in two parts because I've seen regulation and regulators and their active role in an industry, especially financial services, over 2 decades
Sure.
in financial services, see a direct benefit. And it doesn't surprise me that the survey results showed that financial services CISOs are sort of ahead of other industries in designing plans for addressing these kinds of risks. It's very clear from a regulator and internal audit and audit committee perspective that leadership within an organization has ultimately the responsibility for managing risk, and therefore you're coming up with methods and techniques for addressing them. That, I think, is going to be crystal clear benefit of having clarity around who's going to tackle these problems. We're not going to be looking for government to solve all issues, but I think that there is a benefit to regulation where we outline expectations for organizations that have a role in the creation of GenAI tools. So responsible GenAI, I think, is absolutely key. But the manifestation of risks, how these things will come to be, I think that is organizations' leadership responsibility to come up with techniques and methods for addressing them. They need to be studying the problem. They need to be thinking about what's new and what's presently the kinds of risks that we're facing. So we're not going to solve this through regulation, but I think there's a benefit to some common sense regulation for sure.
Grant, you're an old regulator. What do you think?
I think for...
Well, he's young, of course, but
No, not
he
at
has a
all.
long history as a regulator.
I think for a lot of people, having regulations provides a bit of a safety net of like what is an acceptable level of due diligence that you need to be in order to be, that we did the things we needed to do. It doesn't mean that you're not going to have an incident or you're not going to have, a malicious actor that, exploits you in some way, shape, or form. But I think for individuals who are CISOs particularly that are also now seeing personal liability, right? It's not just professional liability. I might lose my job over this incident, but it could be, far more personally impactful. To have some regulations that are, this is the expectation of what, was enough. Maybe not even enough. You certainly need to be doing more and understand and own your risk, but being able to point to something that said, this is what the broader ecosystem and the guidance that was coming out was, and you know what? I met all of that, and our organization met all of that, and we still had an incident because, much like fraud, cybersecurity, or you don't get to a place where you're safe. You just get to a place where you've got controls in place. And so understanding what controls you need around AI and having those regulated, I think is going to be necessary and helpful for the ecosystem.
One of the things you hear a lot in discussions of regulation, and the EU is very proud of itself because they've passed AI regulation, but they say it's risk-based. What does that mean, particularly in the cybersecurity context? It's hard to get a straight answer, even when you use a GPT tool.
Well, I think, and risk-based is, as a policymaker, it is something that I have talked a lot about. And really, when it comes down to it, it means allowing, to me, enough flexibility that an individual operator who understands their environment, understands their threat posture, understands the importance of the information and what they're trying to protect, has the flexibility. So you've got, a framework or a regulatory, again, baseline that you need to meet. But the risk management piece is you still have to make the decisions for your environment that are appropriate for your environment. And so I think it's always going to be a necessary element for cybersecurity and for AI.
Yeah, spot on. I think that without commenting specifically on the EU, I do think that there is benefit to prevailing strategies that will help guide the industry forward. This makes it top of mind for leadership and organizations that might not be thinking about this kind of problem. But once again, risk-based, I think, is going to be essential. We need to adjust either through industry or to organizational dynamics.
So maybe one thing to ask about that is how do you use AI in your work? How do your teams use AI?
Yeah, that's a great question. So thank you. What we're looking at is how do we accelerate the defender, right? What capabilities? There are truisms within cybersecurity. There are not enough individuals. It's hard to train them. It's hard to keep them. So as a CISO, I'm looking for something that's going to give me a leg up, that's going to take my most junior analyst, make them a more senior individual. So we're actually introducing, I have deployed capabilities and are leveraging them within Trellix as part of my own defense program to aid that developer, aid that SOC analyst with the benefit of decades of knowledge on how an incident should be handled, right? That's ultimately accelerating how they're going to handle this. So if you think of it, it's almost like a very senior SOC analyst sitting alongside and saying, well, you may want to take a look at that. This is a precursor to where I think we're all headed, right? Which is the potential benefit of GenAI. One where it's machine level speed and response. But we have to get through this path is, do I trust what it's coming up with as recommendations and actions and not shut down my entire company when it sees something that might be nefarious?
Yeah, I love AI, but you do have to double check.
Exactly.
And that's the answer. What about you, Grant? Do you see this? What do you see with others?
Yeah, so...
Oh, let me just say, by the way,
Yep.
Accelerate the defender. We're going to steal that for the title of a report. So you can claim copyright.
Copyright.
Yeah.
I was thinking it's your 10x defender.
There you go.
Is the other
10x
part of that.
defender's too wonky. Accelerate
Accelerating
the
the
defender.
defender.
Accelerate the defender. I love it.
So for kind of how we're looking at AI and how we're leveraging it, I think, to Harold's point on, you have to really still be able to understand, and particularly in my business where we're providing a lot of guidance to various clients, we need to understand what the analysis was. So we're not really in the point where we can leverage an AI tool for the analytic piece, because that is kind of the expertise that we're bringing and the thing that's most critical in like the services we deliver. But certainly from the ability to get through, a 400-page regulation or a 2,000-page law or something along those lines. To be able to have it take some first cuts, I think is what a lot of organizations are looking at that are sort of more on the, either consulting side or information services delivery side of the sectors.
Harold, are you building your own tools using it, like LLMs or Llama or something?
We're leveraging a couple of off-the-shelf. We have some partnerships and collaboration with AWS, looking at a couple of different techniques that we then inject guided investigation and tips and techniques for SOC analysts, so it has that context and says, if I see this, here's what I think should happen next.
Where do they get their data? Is it your data?
That's the multi-decades of product and cyber defense from the combinations of FireEye and McAfee.
So that actually gives you an advantage then, because
does.
you have this big database to build on. Are you seeing that in other companies, Grant? What do
Oh,
they do?
absolutely.
Yeah.
I think because these models come down to all about the data, right? What is the data that you can put into it? How can you train them in a way that's meaningful and going to be valuable for the use cases you're looking at? And how do you do it in a way that you don't give up your data inadvertently? And I see a lot of companies that are concerned with kind of the open models of, what are their workforces going to do, and perhaps unknowingly say, hey, make this very confidential memo better and do it on a tool that maybe was not approved for that use is potentially problematic.
You got that problem too?
We certainly do, right? So I also manage the internal program and the adoption of GenAI within the organization and how developers and engineers might be leveraging these capabilities. That's something that also has to be governed, which is, I think, part of the soul searching that CISOs are doing everywhere. We're adopting a brand new technology. The technology itself has forces and impacts on the organization, but ultimately we're governing another piece of technology, and we have to find effective ways to do that. So lean in, would be my advice to CISOs everywhere.
Lean in.
Lean in.
Yeah, that's good advice. In some ways, this is sort of a replay of the .com movie, except the angst has been accelerated. Instead of over 10 years, we're doing it in 3. So same sort of problems. Let's talk a little bit about who the attackers are, because one of the things we were looking for, didn't get 100% good outcome on this, is does AI give non-state actors a benefit? Do you see them using it? What's the use you see by attackers and criminals? So I don't know who wants to go first.
I think yes is the short answer. I think it gives everyone an advantage, and I think it makes we've seen, quite frankly, over the last few years, a lot of what we would traditionally think of as criminal actors have been increasing their capabilities and look a lot more like nation-state actors than they did before. I think that's been a trend over the last, certainly 6-8 years. I think that is going to happen even faster and continue. I think you'll see nation-state actors able to up their game even more. And I think you'll see non-nation-state actors, be them criminal or hacktivist or whatever it's going to be able to be far more sophisticated. Again, because the tools are going to give them the ability to do what used to take deep research into an organization, and do that in a matter of seconds or minutes, as opposed to weeks and months where you really needed a team of it that only a nation state was going to devote to a particular project.
Yeah, I was talking to an investigator yesterday from the Hill, and they said that their best source is corporate filings, and that you can use AI to scan the corporate filings. People have to file this stuff, but it tells you what the goals are, where the money is, who's in charge. So that's a real challenge, because we don't want to say these should not be public record anymore. But at the same time, if they're public record, they're fair game for AI. And one of the things that surprised me in the survey was more than 80% said they'd seen the rate of cyber attack increase in the last year. So if anyone out there thought we had gotten our hands around this problem, please rethink. Harold, what are you seeing?
Absolutely. So another set of recommendations, right? Taking this concept back to risk-based approach. As a global cybersecurity firm, we're looking out for very specific APTs or advanced nation-state actors, and we have specific monitoring for those groups. We are, of course, recognizing that less sophisticated non-nation state actors are getting more sophisticated, more capable with the advent of GenAI. Speed is probably the biggest challenge we're seeing, right? So you might have a financially motivated non-state actor with tremendous speed and agility. In multiple headlines, we've seen that play out. And we refer to it internally as shadow syndicates. It's this kind of combined entity. If you look at all of the different forces and capabilities that can be orchestrated against an organization, it's pretty elaborate. I still believe that it's important to keep our eyes on specific nation state actors, but they're definitely giving us a run for our money. The good thing is there are a lot of other collaborators and partners out there that are providing great threat intelligence on those actors as well.
I should mention to the audience that we will have time at the end for audience questions. So it'll be a few minutes before we get to them. But if you're thinking of something or if something piqued your interest, send it in. I don't quite know what to. I think there should be a button somewhere on your website, but we will take questions from the floor. Harold, tell us a little bit more about shadow syndicates. I like that term. It's one of the things that I've seen change is it's not just a person out there. The ecosystem of cybercrime is its contracts, its expertise. When you look at some of the ransomware groups, they have specialized groups. They can get them online. It's an amazing environment.
They focus on specific industries at a time and go one by one to establish a threshold or a foothold within an organization. The concept for us, shadow syndicates, is ultimately that where it serves their benefit, these threat actors will actually work together, collaborate, and share information. The concept of an access broker, right? So that initial individual who got a foothold and then sells that foothold to the next highest bidder that they can then turn into some profitable endeavor, maybe a large-scale ransomware campaign. Those are realities on the ground. What ultimately I'm hoping for us to be able to recognize as defenders everywhere is that they collaborate. They collaborate very actively and openly. The concept of a den of thieves, there's even processes and protocols that they've established to come up with trust between them, right? Where they have effectively custodians and others so that they can financially transact effectively on the dark web. But these are realities that are confronting every organization, whether they're aware of it or not. It's not just nation state actors that they need to be worried about. They need to be considering how these smaller, financially motivated threat actors have become far more capable and oftentimes focus on specific industries and size organizations, not least of which is the most alarming concern. There was a recent FBI briefing around the concept of sextortion, which is targeting teenagers as organized criminals to try and find some way of extorting them for financial gain.
You wouldn't think it would be worth it with teenagers. I mean, I guess.
High enough volume, I guess, if at the end of the day, if that's their profit imperative, but they're also deploying capabilities. So we have to understand this is a very broad problem, right?
And the market is much more organized than people know. I think one of my favorite sites that I never would visit from my CSIS network is, it's like Amazon. It gives a rating. This seller has sold successfully like 20 times in the past. It's like, holy cow, so it's like Amazon for cybercrime. You probably shouldn't say that, right? But what are you saying, Grant?
Yeah, well, I think it also makes it that, a malicious actor who's good at one particular thing can now be very successful because there's a support structure. They can outsource. I mean, it is a business, right? The malicious actors are in this to make money, and they recognize that everyone doesn't need to build out all their own business processes and understand, how to get the money from people. If you're really good at just getting access and that's what you like to do, you can do that and then sell that access to others. So I think we're seeing lots of different models where, again, it's a business. They're almost their own sector where they are working together in ways to, generate profits, and that's what they're after, and that is their motivation. Nation state actors, still a different set of motivations, but those that are looking to monetize, there's a lot of ways to monetize malicious activity still.
Yeah, one of my questions is, have you seen evidence or examples of this already? So, and without naming company names per se, we all know a few, but what are some good examples of this? Besides, sextortion is just weird, but what are some other examples?
Well, I think we have the Advanced Research Center. We monitor the dark web. We look at how threat actors are collaborating, what they're sharing, and gaining insights from that, which we then ultimately translate into our products and capabilities. We're seeing these threat actors exploring, kicking around ideas, leveraging offline large language models, which allows them to be completely off-grid, effectively not visible to any of the large players, which is why I have some concerns about trying to regulate this purely with those GenAI type organizations won't really achieve the outcomes we're looking for. So it's really early indicators. We haven't seen a package drop fully that I would say is totally disruptive. We have seen some capabilities that are, you effectively can just say to a large language model, get me a web shell on that company's web server, and that's it. And it's going to try multiple techniques to try and achieve that.
That's really cool.
I see a lot of the less cool, perhaps more mundane, where just, Harold mentioned earlier business email compromise. I see a lot of that, and it's
Still?
Oh, absolutely.
And it's one of my favorites 10 years ago, and I thought, this won't last very long. It's just too dumb.
And it works, right? Phishing works, business email compromise works. The ability for someone to understand the internal processes of an organization, I think, I don't know, but I believe AI is accelerating it, that they'll see a market or a sector or understand how money moves and look at ways to exploit that and just have it get sent to them to the wrong place from our perspective. But I see a lot of companies that are just running into kind of not sexy, not exciting, but impactful types of activity along those lines.
Yeah, I talked to a big director some years ago who wanted to make a movie about cybersecurity, and it's just, if you don't have the big sexy ones, it's just not going to make a good movie. I won't tell you the name of the movie; it was a bust. There's a lesson there.
Most of the cybersecurity criminal activity, I think, is not exciting.
Yeah.
It is mundane stuff that just continues to work.
But it makes a lot of money.
Yep.
So that's amazing. Harold, how has AI changed the services? You mentioned this. How has it changed the services and products you offer? Has it changed them? What are you doing differently from what you did, say, at the start of your time at Trellix? Is it new products, new services?
We have introduced new capabilities that ultimately are about accelerating the defender. I think that's one of the key goals and objectives. We're moving as an industry, cybersecurity is moving towards this concept of platformization, right? How do we create common capabilities? I like the glass of milk example, right? I want the glass of milk. I don't need everything associated with the production of that glass of milk. So I need a DLP defense, I need intrusion prevention, I need an endpoint security. So coming up with common layers and techniques, but ultimately the benefit only comes when I can orchestrate across all those different technologies and capabilities. For us, we're open, we're an open ecosystem, so if a customer has a particular endpoint solution that they want to work with, that's perfectly fine. Ultimately, we see our responsibility in the industry to create an ecosystem to help foster an ecosystem where other organizations like us are partnering with us in the benefit of our customers, ultimately.
Where does AI fit into that?
It's ultimately about gaining faster insights, providing that SOC analyst, which is going to be an instrumental role in any security operations capability. Regardless of what GenAI might bring to the table, we see the human capital as absolutely critical to the benefit and the defense of an organization. So it's all about how do I make the most timely, beneficial insights to this individual who's going to take the right actions to contain the risk.
How about you, Harold? Grant, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think to pick up on the helping the SOC analyst, I think is really, really important because we definitely have alert overload in cybersecurity in general, and we have lots of tools that say, that doesn't look quite right. This doesn't look quite right. Someone should go check on this. And the ability to decrease the amount of things someone needs to check on and make it really clear that we're prioritizing the items that a SOC analyst needs to go do something about, I think is really important. And so as AI tools are able to really help the people and help the people focus on the things where human attention is going to be most critical and most valuable, I think is going to be places that, if I were in an organization, I would be looking to make AI investments.
Yeah, so one of the things, you kind of gave us a partial list or maybe even a full list, but let's sort of summarize what the defense benefits are of AI. We've done a good job of covering the benefits to the attacker. And as you said, Grant, they have a speed advantage, in part because they don't have bureaucracies. But what are the defense benefits? You mentioned some of them, Harold.
So if you think about how within our organization, for example, but probably true for the industry, the adoption of AI as a concept, machine learning as a variant, if you will, has been in place for a very long time. And it's all about the anomaly detection. It's about finding what looks unusual and how do I highlight that for an individual. Where we are now, right, what we've introduced, what we believe will help to disrupt and improve that, is to take all that noise and say, okay, of all those things that have occurred that are anomalous, what does the SOC analyst really need to do? Where do they need to focus? What does it ultimately mean? Because every SOC, everywhere, is dealing with hundreds of thousands of alerts, probably every single day. So no matter how much human capital you apply to that, you're just not going to be able to consume all of it. And as an operator, I've been in situations where, for a particular organization, that low-rated, coming back to risk-based approach, if we say to ourselves, we're going to focus on those high and critical rated, I've had a low severity issue ultimately be like the pin that was the early indicator of a problem, right? So how do I get humans that are focused on that? The only way to really do that is to adopt technologies like GenAI.
Yeah, when you said that, I of course thought, as if you were an attacker, the low priority ones that aren't getting attention are probably a good place to start. So maybe there is no low priority, or certainly the attacker can rethink the priorities in a way that the defender may not have thought. When you were talking though, and this might be a little wonky, if it is, we can just move on. You need to use AI, you need an algorithm behind it. So how do you develop that algorithm? How does it learn? How do you evolve it? And people have questions about the trust in algorithms, and it sounds mystical. It's just mathematical code that someone's writing. Where do the algorithms fit into what you're talking about?
So for us, we believe that exploring multiple large language models makes sense. So we're leveraging AWS Bedrock, which allows us access to cloud and several others to explore whether or not this ultimately is creating the outcomes and the expectations we had for the initial test case. So feeding in and exploring how these models come back with results is part of the task. Trellix is not in the business of necessarily developing, primary original large language model. We're really able to leverage some of the off-the-shelf models, and I think many other organizations are doing exactly the same.
Does this come up all in lawyers?
So I think what's coming up with our clients is questions around, and I'm not working with clients necessarily that are developing those models, but are seeking to understand them better, right? Is there an amount of explainability in a particular model? And with some of them, there might be. With many of them, there are not going to be over time, right? You might be able to explain why the model made a particular determination today, but if you've trained it to learn from itself, you're not going to know next week or next year, why it's necessarily doing that. And so how do you have the controls to be able to understand, what is the model doing and why is it doing it? I see a lot of people asking those questions. I don't see good answers yet, but I see a lot of people asking those questions.
Do you see that as well?
Absolutely, absolutely. So for us, testing, right? Evaluating what are the outcomes across multiple large language models to try and make sense of it all. Ultimately, supporting it with very senior security practitioners who are looking at the results and saying, that absolutely makes sense. The conclusion this model reached makes sense to me, and this is the right technique and method to explore that. So For us, I think it's going to be something we need to gain confidence in before we ultimately hand some of those defensive strategies to.
Yeah, I'm laughing
LLMs.
because sometimes you hear people on the Hill saying that they want transparency into the algorithm.
Yeah.
And it's like, if I put it in front of you, would you know what it was?
Right.
Right.
So,
Right.
That's exactly right.
Any of the algorithms they use today.
yeah.
Right.
And if I put it in front of you today, will it be the same a month from now?
And that's-
Yeah. So that's going to be a challenge. We haven't talked about the relationship between, and this is a long-standing theme, cybersecurity, CISOs, CIOs, and the board. And one of the things that continues to surprise me is that what I would call the relatively slow uptake by many boards of the importance of this as an issue for their company. What are you both seeing?
It's a great question. I've supported multiple organizations. In some cases, I was the first CISO ever presented to that particular board. And it's not unusual for CISOs to have 5 minutes once a quarter to try and distill the entirety of everything going on in that organization to a couple of impactful data points. We need more time. I think CISOs need more time with their boards, more time with their executive leadership teams to really distill what's going on in the threat landscape and what does it mean to the industry, right? And to your organization within that industry. So it is an ongoing challenge. There are challenges naturally that I've had conversations with CISOs where the collaboration partnership with other executives, whether it's CIOs or others, can be strained depending on the organization's goals, right? It might be a cost-cutting situation for a particular organization, and CISOs are only seeing more and more risk on the horizon, right? So they're advocating and campaigning for more budget when the organization as a whole is reducing. So there are these absolute challenges, but what I would say to advise any boards or CEOs that are having conversations with CISOs is dig in. The landscape is changing so dramatically. Look to them as experts to help navigate those grounds.
Great. You must talk to a lot of people about this.
I do, and do a lot of kind of, getting brought in to help boards understand and facilitate tabletop exercises and things that just raise awareness, which I think education is really, really important. And it's education.
Education for the board.
Both. I think we need boards that understand cybersecurity and technology enough to ask good questions. I used to always say, if the CEO asks the CISO, "Are we safe?" Like, that's not a very, you either say yes and get fired next week, or you say no and get fired today. But we really need,
How about maybe?
Right, we need people that can ask, better questions of what is our risk profile, what does it look like, what are the threats that we're facing. At the same time, I've met a lot of CISOs and technologists who really want everyone else in the world to understand everything about how their world operates and why it's hard and why it's complicated. And that doesn't work with boards, and it's never going to work with boards. We also need CISOs that ideally have spent some time on the business delivery or mission delivery part of an organization in their career, and we're not, in my opinion, just technologists, not pejorative just, but spent their entire time in technology, because our CISOs need to approach the board looking at the company through the board's lens and understanding, if I'm trying to get tons more money and we're having very unprofitable string of quarters, that's not going to work well. And so how is what the CISO is contributing and contributing to the overall business, and what does that look like, and how do they communicate it?
Yeah, I wasn't going to ask this, but it's an interesting point that both of you can comment on, which is so we had this long discussion about cybersecurity as a cost center, not a profit center. It's a little boring, but does AI change the cost structure for defenders, for companies? What is it? How does it make it different? It must change the weights on where you spend or what you spend on. I'm guessing.
I think down the road it will.
Yeah,
down the road it will. CISOs, as I have suggested time and time again, that CISOs really lean into what's happening with GenAI. It's the only way that they're going to effectively govern the space. Right? You mentioned .com. I would equate it to something similar to the adoption of cloud. Right? Organizations went all in, and now we have to manage it. Right? So it got ahead of them. I would say CISOs need to lean into and see what the organization is looking to do with GenAI, whether it's in cyber defense as some potential benefit, maybe some cost optimization reduction, or avoiding certain capital expenses by optimizing certain workflows. That's all possible. I think that's still a little bit down the road. The threat landscape just continues to evolve so dramatically. So for now, I would see the benefits of leaning in and the cybersecurity into play to look at how is my organization adopting this, right?
Yeah, so absolutely agree. I think people and CISOs need to pay attention to where this is going. I will be surprised if 5 years or even 10 years from now, cybersecurity, that organizations are spending less money on cybersecurity because of AI capabilities. I think they hopefully will be doing cybersecurity better. I think we'll have a better defensive posture. But I would be surprised if, with the plethora of new tools, whether they're cybersecurity tools and AI tools and things that are going to need to be integrated, the fact that the risks are going to continue to grow, I think the CISO's role is going to continue to be a cost center. We're going to have to balance that. I think they can have opportunities to get far more effective. I just don't know that we're going to actually get cheaper from an actual dollar value.
Wrong answer, Grant. So when you were talking, I was thinking when I started doing this stuff, which was a while ago, you too, when I went into a senator's office, I would always look on his desk to see, or her desk, to see, did they have a yellow legal pad? Because that meant they were still writing out their emails and giving them to someone else to type. You don't see that anymore, but there is this generational aspect. Is that part of what shapes the thinking of boards? I don't want to say digital native, but some of them come out of the space. It's accelerated, but is this generational? Will we have a new crop of board types 5 years from now who are AI fluent?
I think yes. I don't think we'll see it that way, though. I don't think we'll experience it as like a step function where suddenly things will be different. It's been an evolution, right? I would say every board member today, probably in the world or certainly in the country, is more technically literate than those from 5 years ago or 10 years ago. We're probably all individually more technically literate than we were. At the same time, everyone around them is more technically literate, so you don't necessarily see that, oh wow, the board gets it a lot more than they did. I think the pandemic shifted people off their, it was less successful to write out my emails when I then had to type them myself because I was working from home in my basement, right? And so I think that accelerated everyone who thought they could just skip this technology generation. And I think people in general now know they're going to have to be technically literate. They're going to have to understand AI at every level. I think it'll be helpful. I just don't think it's going to be an aha moment for us.
Yeah, I would just add to that. I completely agree. The challenge is maybe not so much generational, but the paradigm shift enabled, whether it's cyber risk that you're trying to manage or the rapid evolution of GenAI, are creating a world where that board member and what they knew to be true about their industry a quarter ago is potentially fundamentally changed. And the acceleration, the amount of disruption that's happening across all industries everywhere, I think is something that needs to be incorporated. So it's less about becoming technically savvy and understanding how to leverage technology, but also understanding that the ground beneath you is changing so dramatically, so quickly.
Yeah, and one difference between this movie and earlier movies like .com is people have seen that movie, and so they know if they don't keep up, they'll end up like Tower Records. That changes the environment. What if you were advising a course of study for a board member? What would you tell them to look at? I mean, some of it you can get just from the if you read the Journal or the Times or not even the trade press, you're going to get some of this. But what would you tell board members to focus on when it comes to AI and cybersecurity?
I actually would recommend just use the technique and technology itself to help you. So go into your favorite LLM and say, come up with a regiment for me. Here's how I like to learn. And come up with some criteria over the next 2 weeks for me to learn all about what you can do. And it will unlock their understanding of just how quickly this has all come to be.
Now, I'm going to go and try that when we get back. So I think that sounds like really good advice. What would you say, Grant?
That is great advice.
That'd be really cool. I wonder what it's going to say.
Well, and what I love about that is it's both going to expose the people, a board member asking that question, to kind of how quickly the technology responds and reacts. I think what's almost more powerful is it's going to expose them. I would tell them, do that 3 different ways or 5 different ways, right? Slightly change the way you describe your own learning style and see what the results look like. And I think what they're going to get out of that is how much the prompt matters and how much nuances in the prompt, what the impact is, whether it's a significant or severe impact or not. But I think all of that just goes to them understanding the speed with which this disruption is happening inside their organization, inside their customers' and clients' organizations, and inside the market in general. And they have to be able to react and respond and have a level of agility that really wasn't necessary before.
And have some fun with it, I would recommend. Like, start with the prompt of, you're Benjamin Franklin and you're telling me about large language models, right? And take on that persona. You can do all kinds of fun and interesting things. We're here in DC, we might as well go to our founding fathers.
DC, the fun capital of the United States. But what would you, so one thing I've discovered is that writing the prompt is the real skill. I don't need to know how it works, I need to know how to write the prompt. What kind of prompt would you write for a board member? What would you tell them to ask? I mean,
yeah, I would say
and not Benjamin Franklin.
Yeah, not Benjamin Franklin. I would say outline exactly what your goals and responsibilities are. I have a financial services lens. I was head of marketing for XYZ. These large language models are now adopting and developing memory, or they've introduced memory, so they can remember 18 prompts later that you're a board member and these are the types of concerns that you're focused on, and say, just boil this down to the top 3-5 bullet points I need, right? And you absolutely can do that.
And I would add, I think, being able to be very self-aware. What is my leadership style? What is my learning style? What is it that I'm looking for so that the model can craft a response in a way that, there are some people that like reading memos, and there's some people that want a video about it, or want an audio file delivered to them, or just want a conversation, or just want the bullets. And so understanding, and I think there might be a lot of self-discovery in that process, but understanding what type of leader and learner they are at the same time will be helpful, and describing that to the model.
Suppose I write a prompt that says, tell me what my CISO should do about AI. What would you get? Pretend you're a GPT for a minute.
It's likely going to source some of the prevailing press and outline a set of frameworks and recommendations on frameworks that should be adopted. I think those are some of the major points it'll highlight. It'll likely say, you need to have some data controls for data egress, that kind of thing. Right?
All right, I might come back with the report you guys just did and give you the statistics of what CISOs are actually thinking and how they're feeling about this.
Well, that's actually a weakness in this, in that it is so based on what they can scrape off the internet. So, and if you know the field at all, you think, this isn't right, or why did they use this one? And profile, so that's an algorithm problem. It's not a board problem or a CISO problem.
We've always said it must be true, it's on the internet. And
what?
And I think to these models, often
that
is actually the case, right?
Not true.
As far as they're concerned, what they have to go on is something that is on the internet or put into them. And so again, understanding what goes in and understanding where is that model sourcing the data that they're going to base their output on is really important.
So if you were an attacker, you could actually ask, tell me what the vulnerabilities are at this company.
Yeah.
You could refine the prompt a couple times.
Yeah.
Which is also, we mentioned earlier, how is this going to help defenders? I think that's a defender opportunity as well, right? To understand your own vulnerabilities, to have models that help with red teaming assessments and vulnerability identification and things that your environment, again, through the same way that the adversary knows it.
That's the next generation of AI, is it will be able to do red teaming. Maybe it's available now, but that would be kind of neat to see red team my company, tell me what the flaws are. I wonder what, I can try that one at home too.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're coming up to the end here of our time. And so let me start by saying thank you. Do you have some questions? Oh my goodness. We may have to run over. Cheapers. Wow, we got a lot of questions. Let me read through them real quick. Well, I'll ask one and then you can answer it. Has the increase in cyber attacks you've seen also included an increase in sophistication with AI? So yes or no?
I would say yes. Sophistication brought on by speed, by comprehensiveness in the attack, meaning all the angles and methods. We might see a technique where it was a ransomware campaign, but it was augmented by a complete compromise of a mail server, let's say, to monitor internal communications. So sophistication is up, speed is up. Short answer.
Yeah, I think it's hard to say that's because of AI. I mean, what has actually caused that, but I think it's certainly we know there are better tools to make that easier for people.
This one is a classic one, but we have to ask it. And I'll point out that John Maynard Keynes wrote an article in 1930 about the jobs of the future, where he said, don't worry about automation. But what concern is there that AI could replace jobs in the C-suite?
The C-suite, where there's a high degree of organizational savvy, industry-specific knowledge, I think those are probably safer for the short term. I do think that there are going to be opportunities for disruption within the cybersecurity industry for those roles that are rinse and repeat, where you're analyzing the same data sets. And my hope, because we're still in a negative unemployment rate situation worldwide, we have a talent shortage, is that will allow SOC analysts and others to be brought up to hire more sophisticated challenges and allow machines to handle machine speed issues.
So the place we ought to be looking for changes in jobs is maybe a little bit lower down the food chain.
Yeah.
So, and there could be real benefit there.
Yeah, I think a lot of the organizations that are represented in the C-suite, I had a conversation with Representative Foster recently, and he was talking about the democratization of information, that in the future we will all have the best lawyer available in our pocket, essentially because of AI. And so are you still going to have a head general counsel in your C-suite? Absolutely. Is their work going to be different? Is their workforce going to look different? I think so.
Maybe building off that one, these are really good questions, by the way, so thank you. Even if CISOs are in compliance, that might not be enough to prevent incidents. Do you think that there are regulations that are duplicative or unnecessary?
Duplicative? Having navigated and been responsible for privacy, for example, I was chief privacy officer at another organization. I know that there was a lot of overlap, state by state. So for privacy, which of course has the Venn diagram, there are going to be a number of common areas. I would say absolutely, we need to look at something more comprehensive, more broad-based. We have, as a financial services CISO, you have New York Department of Financial Services, hugely impactful organization that sets and outlines a set of expectations. You have PCI, depending on the industry and vector, you're going to have a lot of different stakeholders, and you're managing all those different stakeholders, not least of which, of course, is the SEC, which has its own requirements and expectations.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot of overlap. I think the Department of Homeland Security, just on cyber incident reporting, has identified 52 different reporting requirements, and I think those are only at the federal level. So there's a lot, or some of them unnecessary. I'm certain they are. We're going to have to find ways to get our hands around the regulations that are out there, because the compliance burden, I agree with the premise, just because you're compliant does not mean you're secure or not going to have an issue. It means you've taken steps, and I think that that's necessary but not sufficient. But we've got to find a way that we're not giving people so many steps that they don't have time to do anything other than be compliant with 52 regimes or however many of them your particular sector has to deal with.
And we should note that Senator Peters is holding a hearing today, I think, and has introduced legislation on harmonization of cybersecurity reporting requirements. He's working with the Office of the National Cyber Director. So maybe we'll get, it's always dangerous to bet on something good coming out of Congress, but you don't want to rule it out. There's a chance here. Could we or should we raise the barrier to entry for Gen AI for offensive purposes. And then how would you do that? Does that make, people talk a little bit about export controls. It doesn't work because it's math and software, you know.
That's right.
Catch that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be great if you could find a way to say, you know, the bad guys can't have access to all sorts of technology that they have access to do. I just don't know how to make that happen.
I think this is the natural evolution of technology. Yeah. Pandora's out of the box, right? Like it's already done. So it's now about how do we react to this.
Yeah, it's a nice thought, and I think people will pursue it, but there's some real implementation problems. Last question. It's a good one. What are some practical steps that organizations can take to support CISOs in adopting to the challenges of AI? Now, that's, of course, been much of the whole conversation here today, but let's maybe conclude with that question because it's so good.
Ultimately, I think it's have an appropriate audience, dedicate more than 5 minutes per quarter to the topic, but also expect of your CISO to have an organization-appropriate business context conversation, right? So by spending more time, you can evaluate whether or not you have the right individual in the role, having the right kinds of conversations, are they surfacing the right kinds of issues for the organization. But if they're not bringing forward some of these very challenges and the implications for where you are, meaning Gen AI and what it might be doing to financial services or others, then I think that's where you need to double click and you might need to support them with additional resources and support.
Yeah, I remember 15, 20 years ago where the security people were the no people in an organization, right? No, you can't do that. No, you can't do that. They have to be the yes people, and they have to be the yes people with AI and helping to bring AI into the organization, understand the business needs. They need to bring it into their own organization, but understand the business needs that the broader organization has, that the C-suite needs, and be able to help deliver AI as a tool both internally for the CISO organization, but internally for the entire business.
Well, we've been the yes people here today, so I'm pleased to see that. Harold, Grant, thank you for doing this. Thanks to everyone for watching. Next time will be as much fun. Thank you.
Thank you.